Welcome to the Mindful Dietitian podcast. I'm Fiona Sutherland, body-inclusive non-diet dietitian and yoga teacher from Melbourne, Australia, and director of the Mindful Dietitian. Please join me as I have important conversations with dietitians and health professionals from all over the world about getting brave and leaning into tough conversations as we cultivate a strong community of practitioners committed to body-inclusive practice. We'll talk about mindfulness, we'll dig into diet culture, and we'll explore ways of bringing courageous and important topics into our professional spaces so we can more deeply understand our own experience and make our work more meaningful. Thank you for joining me. Hello and welcome back to this next episode of The Mindful Dietitian. It's wonderful to have you here. It's with the greatest pleasure that I share with you this fantastic conversation with US-based dietitian Whitney Trotter, one very extraordinary human being. Although Whitney is pretty new on the social media scene, hitting the ground running in 2020, she's a dietitian with 10 years experience, as well as being a nurse and a yoga teacher. Whitney's been serving in the HIV/AIDS community throughout these 10 years, as well as working in the eating disorder field. Whitney also previously worked at a level 1 paediatric trauma centre as a paediatric emergency room nurse. In addition to working as an RDN and RN, Whitney served as a member of her county's Rape Crisis Centre as a member of their sexual assault response team. Her work at the Rape Crisis Centre equipped her to co-found an anti-trafficking organisation, RestoreCorps, where she now provides medical training to the community focusing on a human trafficking response. Whitney is the founder and owner of Bluff City Health, a practice dedicated to embodiment, social justice and eating disorders. So we kicked off this conversation with Whitney's goals for 2021, which she wrote and shared on Instagram last October, and some of which are well underway. So these included starting a community group for BIPOC healthcare providers so that clients can find practitioners and find good matches. One of Whitney's other goals was to write a course on anti-trafficking and get that out into the healthcare community. Well, she has ticked that one off the list and it's available now via her website, www.whitneytrotter.com. All of these are in the notes. We then move on and talk about trauma-informed care and discuss why this is a critical aspect of human-centered, compassionate care for all clients, not just those who name their experiences as trauma. Look, we could have talked about that absolutely forever. So we really did exercise some restraint on that one. I'm very proud of us, Whitney. But if you'd like to find out more about trauma-informed care, check out the WIND event that Whitney is doing in March 2021. Again, in the show notes, or the 5-part live online series that I'm doing with Tracy Brown, with all details available via the Mindful Dietitian website. Whitney and I then moved on to the very important topic of grief, so how it shows up, and more importantly, how we can provide space for people's experiences without going into our typical quote-unquote dietitian fixing mode. This was such a great conversation. I absolutely loved it, and I hope you really enjoy it too. I promise I will have Whitney back again so you can enjoy more of her wisdom. Learn more about Whitney's work at www.whitneytrotter.com and via Instagram at whitneytrotter.rd. And of course, find out more about the Mindful Dietitian, including training, supervision, and our most excellent Facebook group at www.themindfuldietitian.com.au. Thank you so much, everybody. I hope you really enjoy this episode, and big thanks to Whitney Trotter for being here with me. Hello, Whitney, and welcome to the Mindful Dietitian podcast. It is such a pleasure to meet you.
Yes, likewise. I'm so excited. So excited.
We have got quite a few conversation topics to pop on the table. So why don't we just launch straight in?
Okay, let's do it.
Now, many people listening will already be familiar with you and your work. You have more recently joined social media, as you were sharing with me. So you were saying that you historically you haven't necessarily enjoyed a great relationship with social media. So what was the change there?
Yeah, so it's so ironic so part of my story is when I had transitioned to private practice, I was very fortunate to kind of have clients already come with me. And then I ended up just creating a Psychology Today profile. So I had no idea that dietitians weren't quote unquote supposed to be on Psychology Today. So I had already kind of started building my practice, word of mouth in the community in Psychology Today. And honestly, I just hate technology. I'm not good at it. I don't like it. It's not my thing. But I was really just convinced to start a business Instagram account. And so I did. And it was also coupled with, so I started it in June. And ironically, I was struggling finding supervision for just some really intense cases. And I got connected to Jessica Wilson, who I think I got connected. I started June, the first week of June, I got on Instagram and got connected with her. And then, of course, as we know, Amplified Melanated Voices blew up, and Instagram just took a life of its own, So it was good timing, good timing to be on Instagram. So.
Yeah, amazing timing. So you have, I noticed that you had switched from Bluff City RD and now to Whitney Trotter RD, is that correct?
Yes. Yeah. So I started my private practice, Bluff City Health, and I never wanted to have my private practice as my name, which is like, we see that a lot as dietitians when they're starting. It's like, what do I do? Well, I didn't want to be the face of my private practice because I wanted other RDs. And then being a nurse and a yoga instructor, I wanted it to be a community resource. But then people were like, wait, you're a dietitian, you do human trafficking, you do anti-racism work. And so I eventually had to get a website. And so my website and brand manager really convinced me. And she said, people really want to know your name. They want to see your face and who you are. And so I was like, okay, so that's kind of how the switch evolved.
It's so interesting, isn't it, when, when how our values or the way that we want to show up in the world, for example, as a mixed practice, maybe with different modalities available to people. And then, the marketing and branding people come along and they're like, hey, Whitney, people want to see you. They want to know your name. And you're like, oh,
yes. So like, oh gosh. So yeah. And it was so funny because another dietitian was like, she was like, I didn't even know your real name because I have a private Facebook, I don't have a business Facebook. And then my Instagram was Bluff City Health. So my Facebook was something different. My Instagram was something different. My practice was something different. So I was like, okay, we got to get some, a little bit of cohesiveness. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And from a business perspective, that totally makes sense. And sometimes it just takes us a while to kind of get on board with all that stuff to make things kind of mesh a little bit together.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
All right. So you are one very, very busy human. You juggle quite a number of roles: parent, partner, business owner, activist, advocate, speaker, and I could just go on, right? You are also a dietitian, you're a nurse, you're a yoga instructor, and we're going to be going on to into some of those roles, and especially your anti-trafficking organisation, which you co-founded. But where I'd love to start with you, Whitney, is last October, you set some pretty amazing goals for 2021. So I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind maybe sharing some of those with us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So in October, another colleague had kind of set some goals, and I've never been somebody to do like a lot of New Year's resolutions and just everything that 2020 was. It was hard on so many levels, personal loss and grief, evolving, entrepreneurial. And so professionally, it was a great year, but I wanted to be really specific in some goals and kind of dreams that I had. So I wanted to write or create a gender affirming BIPOC centered eating disorder facility, write a book, and then work with the FBI as a psych nurse practitioner on their cross country trafficking operations. And then create a course for RDs on recognizing and responding to human trafficking, defund the police and reallocate funds to pay for social workers, therapists, and other clinicians to respond to calls. crisis calls, and then create a body image course for trafficking survivors. So,
wow.
yeah.
Wow.
So yeah, a lot of different goals, but big dreams. So.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And so that was October. It is, as we're recording now, it's February.
Yeah.
So how are you, like when you go back and you read those goals, what shows up in your body, or, when you kind of read those goals back and thinking about, the not only the year that was, but the year in front of us, and what can you see as, which of those goals can you see, yep, that is absolutely within my grasp?
Yeah, when I think about, and I love that question of where it resonates in my body, is it's excitement. It's in my heart of like the hope, because I think I was intentional with these goals of community awareness and involvement, because I don't believe that any one person, like, we can't do this work alone. It becomes it's too overwhelming for our system. So when I think about it, we ironically, I want to say January, started a BIPOC eating disorder collective. And it was so beautiful because therapists and clinicians, from all over, were sending in their information, and we kind of created a Google database for people to be able to go and find a clinician. And that was really amazing, really, really amazing. And so I had an amazing intern that worked with me on that. Write a book is probably going to be 2 or 3 years down the line. Nothing too soon. And the course, so I'll talk about the FBI and then the course. So what a lot of people don't know is I actually got the privilege to work with the FBI years ago on their cross-country operations. And I'll never forget, I walked in, and there was a Black woman who was special agent in charge and was running the command center, the FBI command center in Tennessee. And I was like a little girl. I was starstruck. Like, I just was like, oh my gosh. And so I remember asking her, I was like, well, I just want to be you when I grow up. And she's amazing. And I've stayed in close contact with her. And it was just a really beautiful mentorship and everything for me. And so that really is what led me to go back to school, to want to become a psychiatric nurse practitioner. So I'm working on my doctorate now, and in hopes to, in a few years, be able to do some contract work. But that leads me to the course. So I did do a webinar for dietitians, therapists, and other providers last Thursday. That's now available on my Linktree and my Teachable, on really kind of how to recognize and respond to potential trafficking victims. So I'm really, really proud about that. And I think it turned out great. I got some really good feedback. So it was really awesome, and really a privilege to do.
That is amazing. I really would love to talk to you more about your anti-trafficking work, if that feels okay. I don't want to forget your other goals if you wanted to mention those. But we'll also put a link back to that in the show notes so that people can find that webinar and any of the other work that you're doing as well.
Oh, thank you. That would be awesome.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
So any of the other goals that stand out for the year?
I think that's it. Yeah.
Oh, the body image. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yes. I definitely want to. So, as you know, you and Marci are just legendary in the world of body image. And I think when I see younger dietitians kind of get into the field of eating disorders, I think the fear of trauma and body image comes up a lot. And those are the two things that I really hope that we can integrate, for our colleagues and how they correspond together. But I love doing body image work with somebody that has complex trauma. And so I want to be able to kind of give the knowledge and awareness that I've had throughout the years back to those in our profession, of that you shouldn't be afraid of it. And it is in our scope. It is in our scope to do this. And honestly, I think we're the best. I think we dietitians have such a unique gift and ability to walk with somebody as they're healing their relationship with their body.
Yeah, I love that. And I really appreciate you saying and affirming that dietitians are in a really amazing position to be able to speak about body image with our clients and within our communities. Yeah. I think it is very much top of mind for dietitians, thinking, is this in my scope of practice? And, and I wonder if, that's not even the question to be asking, is if it's in my scope of practice. But maybe the question is, how can we build skillfulness and insight and develop a support system around me, perhaps in the form of training and supervision, that where I can feel competent and confident in being able to meet the experience of another person, because I think that's where we kind of get a bit unstuck. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
I love that. And I am a big proponent of supervision. And supervision from multiple practitioners, I think, is key. And people with just different life experiences, but absolutely. And I think there's a vulnerability that happens in supervision where you as a clinician get to really let your guard down. And it's great for case consultation, but you really get to kind of have a peek, especially if you're working with a supervisor that shares a different identity than you get to have a peek into somebody else's experience and existence. And then you can take that and it just creates a beautiful practice for yourself. So
I love that. And I especially love you highlighting, working with somebody that has a different lived experience, whether or not that has something to do with race, religion, culture, age, gender identity, all the different ways that we show up as humans. I think, you point out something really valuable, and that maybe the tendency for us is to look for more similar than maybe more different. I'm not sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we all get kind of stuck and familiar in our own community, and so that's one of the things that I've been, as I'm doing more supervision with colleagues of okay, well, how can I also get supervision from people that are outside of my community as well? Because I think it's equally as important.
Yes, absolutely. And that's the way that we kind of press our edges as well, and, expand our, through the nervous system lens, we would say, expanding our window of tolerance and understanding more about ourselves and how we show up in the world, and, how important it is for that ongoing learning and growth.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I'm really hoping it feels okay for us to now move into probably your more specialist area, and that is anti-trafficking. You co-founded an organisation called RestoreCorps, and I'm guessing that not a lot of dietitians and healthcare providers really understand about human trafficking, and I'm going to count myself in this too, so I am all ears. So I purchased your webinar last week. I have not listened to it, and the main reason is because I wanted to speak with you today before. I wanted to kind of come in fresh with an open and clear mind.
Yeah.
So Whitney, what do you think are the factors that are really most important for dietitians and healthcare providers to understand about human trafficking? Let's give us the kind of the broad brush version.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm so passionate about anti-trafficking work, and I always tell this to dietitians. Every case that I've ever worked with, maybe the exception of one or two trafficking cases, I've done as a dietitian.
Right. Yeah.
And so I think a lot of people assume my anti-trafficking work is tied to being a registered nurse, and it does go simultaneously. But my direct involvement with survivors, I have done nutritional counseling and worked as a dietitian. So when we think about human trafficking from the macro level, I always tell people trafficking is modern day slavery. It's the buying and selling of bodies. And I think the media, in its attempt to highlight trafficking, has really done a disservice, because we think of Taken and we think of all these extreme rescue operations. And does that happen? Absolutely. But when we're talking about our community, there's a lot of trafficking survivors that are in our community that are still going to work, that are still going to school, and that are still doing daily activities that are getting missed. And I think as dietitians, when we talk about, especially my work of working in eating disorders, anti-racism, and anti-trafficking, I always tell dietitians, there's no reason that you shouldn't be screening for potential trafficking victims and wherever you work. Mm. And Rachel, who's the executive director of RestoreCorps, one of the foundational questions we started really asking and developing is, have you ever had to exchange a sex act for food, clothing, water, or shelter? All of those basic needs are in the scope of a dietitian, and we should be addressing those independently of human trafficking, you know? And I shared, and you'll see this, not to spoil it because you haven't watched it yet. So I'm so glad you got a ticket. But when I was going through, we went to New York several years ago and got some training from GEMS, which stands for Girls Educating Mentoring Services. And they ended up coming out, Rachel Lloyd wrote a book called Girls Like Us. But what's so pivotal for me is in that book, it depicts a 15-year-old trafficking victim and the reason why she stayed. And it was so interesting because she had family dinners. So the pimp would literally have dinners for all of the girls every night. And that's what she correlated to as home. Mm-hmm. So they would sit around the table. They had a dog. So basic needs were getting met, even though she was being trafficked nightly. Mm. And so I think we have a disconnect of trafficking, and that's not every trafficking survivor story, but I think it's so important for us to really understand that it's not a one size all. I mean, it's every gender identity, race, ethnicity, religion. And so, yeah. But it's that reading that book really was transformational in me and my education for other providers on recognizing human trafficking.
Yeah, thank you so much, Whitney. That is extremely valuable to get a kind of like a broad snapshot of a screening question, even like a core screening question that when you said that, I was like, oh, that would be not hard to integrate into an assessment at all.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And I have it as a standard question. I haven't, knock on wood, haven't got any pushback. Even my adolescent, because some people have asked, well, what about adolescents? I work in pediatrics, and I was trained as a pediatric ER nurse. But the average age of entry into trafficking is 12 to 14 years old. So it's definitely applicable to have that screening question on there, even for pediatrics and adolescents.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, one question I wanted to ask you, and I'm just going to put myself out there saying I've actually literally got no idea about this question I'm just about to ask you. But when you stated the screening question, have you ever had to exchange a sex act for food, shelter? What else did you say?
Food, clothing, water, or shelter.
Food, clothing, water, or shelter. Are there other forms of exchanges that people would that would fall under the category of human trafficking?
Absolutely. So kind of to define human trafficking is it's force, fraud, or coercion. So, and they're really, when we talk about kind of law enforcement and that, it does have to be that force, the fraud, or the coercion of that has to be implicated for human trafficking. Mm-hmm. But absolutely. And especially as we think about poverty, yes. I'll never forget, I had when my daughter was born, I had a terrible time breastfeeding. And I never thought I would. Here I was a dietitian, a nurse, did not think at all. But I ended up having pretty significant postpartum depression. And our daughter we had a traumatic birth, but she ended up on having to have a specialized formula, and it was $30 a box. Mm-hmm. And I remember telling my husband, I said, we don't humanize trafficking victims enough, because as a mom, you would do anything and everything to make sure your child was fed. And that is that, again, that humanity aspect of some people end up being victims of human trafficking because they're literally trying to provide for their family.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So the way that you're speaking and the intersections with the trauma experience really are around choicelessness and that sense of powerlessness. Is that correct? Would you say?
Absolutely.
So, which brings us really beautifully to a topic that you and I are extremely passionate about, and that is trauma-informed care. So, if it feels okay to you, of course, we can just have an open conversation between the two of us about this. Do you want to maybe explain a little bit about what trauma-informed care actually is, and maybe some of the ways in which we can be more thoughtful about trauma-informed care within dietetic and healthcare work?
Absolutely. So I like to think of like trauma and then as one word and then informed as two. And it's because like the trauma comes in so many different, it's so complex, right? Like acute, complex trauma, internal trauma, and then to be informed is a verb. And so I think it's something that like we're constantly having to work on and work through to be informed. And I think it changes. It changes based on the population you're serving, your own work that you're doing on your nervous system, which I know you and Tracy are the experts at that. And I love hearing the dialogue in a lot of our settings that we share. But I think being a trauma-informed practitioner there's a certain vulnerability and humility that the clinician or provider needs to go through, because we all have our own internal response. And I think that's the fear sometimes. So I would say as like kind of, when I do the education of, you really have to know your own nervous system and you have to be grounded. Like you have to do the internal work first. Otherwise it gets very tricky because then you're trying to save everyone that you encounter. Oh, yeah. And that's not trauma-informed care. I think giving a choice. I'm a big person on choice. And I think, again, working in eating disorders, sometimes it's hard when sometimes our clients aren't ready. And I think, but there's a power in the choice of that too. So I think being trauma-informed really is the internal work that the practitioner is doing. It's choice. It's understanding lived experiences and identities outside of your own. And I think it's being intentional too. I think it's the intentionality and the reframing and how you're delivering things as well. When I was working in the ER, I would always tell the person what I'm getting ready to do. Okay, hey, I'm gonna look at your skin now, or hey, I'm gonna place my stethoscope right here, or hey, my hands are cold, but I'm gonna warm them up and I'm gonna touch your back, and I just want to make sure I'm not seeing any lesions. So I think it's that like. And as dietitians, we can do that too. We can do that too. So I don't know if that answers your question fully or not.
It sure does. And I adore that response, the way that you kind of weaved together. I love the trauma and then the informed and the kind of the call to ongoing growth.
Yes.
And that ongoing personal work is, that's what I personally love most about being an eating disorder specialist and a nervous system informed dietitian, is that the work and the growth is ongoing. And I think as dietitians, there's often this covert message of that we should know everything right up front, and that it's somehow shameful to not know, or that growth is something that as long as you're growing in like the quote unquote right direction, or whatever that means, that is acceptable, and messing up is unacceptable. Making errors or not knowing is somehow within our profession, it's not seen as valuable. And so what I really love about growth, particularly around trauma-informed care, is there's just so much to explore within ourselves and within the relationships that we build with others as well. So
absolutely. I always say it's the power in the reframe, because I think as practitioners, like, you're going to mess up. I mean, you're going to say something off the wall. Like, I've had to do a reframe. I had a long-standing client. I had to come back and I said something that it did not come out the way I intended. And and so I had to really do a reframe and apologize. And I think, again, like you said, like that humility and the ability to not think that we're perfect or we're never going to make a mistake, like, because we're humans. So
yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that I think about often is that I wonder whether the kind of the way that we think about trauma-informed care almost it could be helpful to either broaden it or shift it slightly. The reason I say that is because I think a lot of dietitians, given that, traditionally it's not part of our foundational training, we don't really speak about it a lot in spaces. Of course, in eating disorders, we speak about it, or in complex mental health spaces, we speak about it, because that is where, folks who have and continue to experience trauma might show up for us. But I think a lot of dietitians think, oh, well, I don't work with people who have experienced trauma, which is just the biggest bunch of crap in the world, right? Or that the way that we think about trauma is kind of limited to DSM-5 definitions, which is so limiting.
Yes.
Whereas what I love about our conversation is that we're, at least a couple of times already, we've talked about the nervous system and how, like, we all have a nervous system, and understanding how we can work with and alongside the shifts and the changes in our nervous system, and how that gets so impacted through our life experiences, and how that is inextricably linked to the work that we do with all of our clients, not just those who have named or who identify their own biological experience as trauma. That was kind of, I don't know what I was saying there, but that was just a blah, 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 blah.
I love it. I love that. And I just have to add so quickly, because I love that you said that. I'm like in school right now, it's so interesting. What I'm studying is anxiety and worry, but the neurobiology aspect of it. And one of the things that I was just, I had to do more research, but it was talking about how fear is not just a feeling, and how your nervous system responds to fear, and how chronic fear increases your risk of stroke, diabetes, cardiovascular disease. And it was just like, it was like just a light bulb, because I'm like, yes, that's it. And I think that's what I want other dietitians and practitioners to know, is that, yes, even if you are CDE, or you're specialist in cardiovascular health, you are working with people that have trauma, whether they put a name to it or not, they have it.
That's it. And especially with, events. I mean, goodness me, we could go back in history for generations and generations, whether it's dislocation, whether it's disconnection, whether it's, experiences of, our geographical enforcement of slavery, whether it's discrimination and stigma.
Absolutely.
So this is not just necessarily big life events. It's also the events that are daily for us, which impact, which impact our nervous system.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I know that you're speaking with Wind next month, which would be great on trauma-informed care. So I'll put the link to that in the show notes, and I'm sure people can hear a lot more about that too. That would be amazing. And if people are looking for I suppose Tracy and mine is more, it's 6 hours. How long's the Wind one?
I want to say mine is an hour, and then an hour 15, and then 15 to 20 minutes of like question and answer.
Q&A. Perfect. Okay. So, your choice, 1.5 hours, and then, and then Tracy and I have, I think it's 6 hours. I can't remember. I should know, but my brain is like fried. And then Tracy does a much deeper dive in her much longer course. So anyway, shameless plug for all three of us there, Whitney.
Yes, all three, and everyone should do all three. I highly encourage it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you know what? I'm not sure about you, but I have gone back and looped back into so many topics, like motivational interviewing, like nervous system work, like the intersection of trauma-informed care and yoga, for example, given we're both yoga teachers. And I think looping back is never a waste of time.
Absolutely agree. Absolutely agree. And you know what's so funny? I know this is like totally off topic, but you and Liz are the ones that got me interested in being and doing the yoga teacher training. Because I had no idea that dietitians, like the possibility of the intersection with trauma-informed care, being a dietitian in yoga, until Liz was telling me about her experience and had shared a little bit of your experience. And so I have to credit you and Liz for really helping me take that plunge, because it's been amazing. I love so much gratitude for the world of yoga.
Oh, it's really interesting, actually. I think that there's so much to learn from that world. I mean, as well as acknowledging, oh my God, it can be so steeped in diet culture and racist attitude. Oh my God, it's just it's very hideous, actually. And also there is just so much beauty and warmth in that community as well, particularly in the personal practice.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Ooh. So what's your favorite practice, like in terms of the different styles of yoga? What do you like practicing?
So it's so interesting you ask that. I actually love a power vinyasa. And I love that. And I actually found yoga when I was diagnosed with postpartum depression. And I was a college athlete and my partner was a college athlete. So we were very used to having just kind of performing at high intense levels. And then I had this experience and I couldn't. And so when I found yoga, it was kind of like the embracement and the attunement that I never knew I could connect it to my body, because I had never really connected or grounded to my body like that. But I enjoy a very nice vinyasa practice. So
yeah, so that feels like a kind of a stimulating, strong practice, which takes you back to your athlete days, maybe.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you know someone else who I'm sure you're very familiar with who loves a really strong vinyasa practice is Dianne Bondy?
Yes.
She's like, look at me go. Look at me go. I'm like, I'm looking and I'm very impressed.
Yes, I love that.
She is a queen, that's for sure. Yeah. Well, actually, I could add, Dianne has a book. She has amazing like video channels. She's just released a new program. She is trauma-informed, inclusive. I could go on. She is one of the great teachers.
Love that. I love that so much.
Awesome. All right. Now, I'm hoping that we might be able to just tack on a little bit of a conversation around grief in anti-diet work. Now, this is something that if anybody wants to check out your Instagram feed, I do notice this is a topic that kind of pops up quite regularly on your platform. So I feel like, I'm observing that this is a topic that comes up really often and commonly in our healthcare rooms, in our dietetic spaces. And I wonder, I'm hoping we might be able to kind of talk through it, because I think that a lot of dietitians are not sure how to work with grief, what it might sound like, what it might look like what are we seeing, what are we noticing, how can we hold a space for people's complex feelings and responses and reactions without stepping into dietitian fixing mode? That's my question.
Yes, I love that. Grief is so powerful. And I think going to that trauma-informed lens is grief can be a diagnosis. So I worked in the HIV community, before I started my eating disorder work and became a nurse. And the attachment to that diagnosis for some, it was an anniversary. And so really empowering them of like, here we are, we can't change it. What does it look like in your body? Can we accept this body? And so as a personal note, I had to really take that work as when I got diagnosed with 2 autoimmune diseases. And it wasn't until that second diagnosis that I really understood body grief and how you can, there are times in our life that I think accepting our body is so overwhelming. and you have to let go of what you thought it was going to be. And especially when you're talking about autoimmune diseases, and some of them you have, there's nothing that you necessarily can do. It's not a fix it, right? And I think as dietitians, we get in this like fix it kind of mindset, and it's hard. It's hard. And so I think as we think about grief, and there's so many different types of grief, is we really give the person the ability to sit with it without us trying to fix it. Like, what does it look like to invite the grief in? What does it look like not to engage in behaviors that might numb or suppress the grief? How do we process the grief in our body?
I guess for a dietitian, for a healthcare worker, the question might be, am I willing to sit with the grief of another person? What's the work I need to be doing in order to be with the pretty intense experiences of someone else without having that reflexive response of wanting, to fix it or to take it away for them as a function of meeting my own needs?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I love that. And I think it's a process. And I think it's, I'm equally as passionate about doing the grief work as I am the trauma work, because I think they're so interconnected.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I think in our more modern day healthcare too, that the honouring of our very complex human experiences is not prioritised. It's throw something at it, even if it sounds helpful, even if it sounds like therapy, even it sounds like quote unquote an intervention or something. That it's that I feel there's a part of me that feels like that it's the doing to rather than the being with, which undermines that trust and that sense of that this is a process as opposed to there's something wrong with me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, if we think about 2020 and now even 2021, everything, like, we are working through our own grief, and we're also holding space for those that are grieving, and we can't fix it. I mean, there is, and all the different facets of grief that are out there, we cannot fix it right now. And so, like you said, it's the inviting and the sitting with, and just walking through with somebody as they experience that grief too, I think is so powerful.
Yeah. And as dietitians, sometimes some of the biggest grief is maybe a changing body, or maybe even a not changing body, when that is the desire or that is the wish, or like you say, a new diagnosis or a diagnosis that's not new but that hasn't really necessarily been processed, really processed, really letting it land and being in the body. So it's, I just think there's so much work to do around that.
Absolutely. And it's kind of like one of the things that I keep is in my mind is their acceptance through the grief. And so, like you said, when we're talking about the body image work, and that's why I have such a soft spot for people with autoimmune diseases and working and incorporating the anti-diet, because I think that there's like this fix of like, if I just do enough, my body will be X, Y, and Z. And that's the thing about our bodies, is that's not the case. Like, it's not this like structured linear thing. I mean, it's, as you know, it's so intricate. And I think when we think about body grief and body changes and body image, of how do those external factors influence the internal process? If I'm in a community that is driven and there's a lot of racial trauma, that grief that I experience is going to be so hard to just celebrate my body when it's feared, in the community, so to speak.
Yeah, it's almost like where there is a lack of spaciousness for us to be able to experience, say, we're talking about grief, for us to be able to experience our grief without it being interrupted by the culture in which we live in, whether that's in healthcare or whether that's the racial culture that we're living in, or how well we're doing financially or not, big changes in life, losses, events, there's just been so much that our poor old nervous systems.
Mm-hmm.
Woo!
I know.
Yikes.
I know. It's just, yeah. I think
It's
we're going to
collective,
be.
isn't it?
It is so collective. It's so collective. I really think that, and at least my hope is that we're going to see a shift in the world of dietetics in 5 to 10 years. And it's going to be the evolution of how to study the nervous system and trauma-informed care. I really, really do.
And how does that leave you feeling?
I am so excited because I will be honest, I think for a while it was a little stagnant, as a dietitian, it's like, but as we have, as we just kind of expand and get familiar, I think, with our own nervous system and our own scope. And I always tell interns, like, being a dietitian, the sky is literally limitless. There are so many things that you can do. And I think as you understand the body and your body, and just all the intricacies of it, and being a trauma-informed practitioner, I mean, we're going to change people's lives.
Yes. Oh my goodness, I love that. And food and eating is such a powerful vehicle for some really important, really deep conversations around relationality, around connection, grief. Like, if we're scrambling around, there's always a food or eating metaphor that we can use. Always.
Absolutely. Always.
Oh my goodness. Whitney, I just cannot express my gratitude enough. We spoke off mic a little bit, saying we can't believe that we haven't kind of connected up until now. So this has been just the absolute highlight of, I was going to say my highlight of my year, but let's not overblow it. Like, I like you just fine. And I hope that I'll have some adventures this year as well.
Yes, absolutely. I'm right there with you. I am right there with you.
Oh my goodness. But I'm really hoping this is a start of just a beautiful connection that we can keep in touch. And I would love to point people in the direction of your brand new website.
Yes. I'm so happy about it. I'm so happy about it.
So cool.
Yeah, WhitneyTrotter.com. And so I'll have access to my courses on there, links for supervision, some resources. All of that is on my website. So I'm really, really proud of it.
That is so cool. And we have already mentioned your Instagram handle, which is
WhitneyTrotter.rd.
Perfect. Anything else that you want to mention, spruik, elevate, anything happening coming up?
So the course is done and recorded, and it's on there, the Human Trafficking course. I am doing a panel next week, February 10th, and that will also be available for repurchase later. But that is going to be discussing religious trauma, eating disorders, and intersection of white supremacy with that. So I'm excited about.
Ooh, that'll be interesting.
Yeah, that panel. And then, of course, the wind webinar, which will be happening in March. So
yeah, fantastic. My gosh, already in 2021, you've been a very busy person.
Yes, I'm so thankful. I'm so thankful for all of the opportunities. It means so much because I'm able to have a really reduced sliding scale to offset that. So that's been one of the things I'm most proud about in my business for my private practice. So
I love that. You know what, we could have turned that into a whole different conversation is, how you can bolster your practice so that you can offer sliding scale.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
So important. Okay. You know what? We'll come back for chapter 2. How does that sound?
Yes. I love that. Part two.
Let's do it. I'm going to be booking you in.
I love it. Let's do it.
We'll have so much more to talk about.
Yes.
Anyway, Whitney, again, such a pleasure. Thank you so much for being here with me on the podcast. It's been so fantastic getting to know you, getting to know more about your work. And I really encourage everybody to go check out your work, sign up for your courses, and learn more about how we can show up and grow.
Thank you. I appreciate that so much. So much.
Thank you, Whitney. Well, that's our episode of the Mindful Dietitian interview series for today. Thank you so much to our wonderful guest and to you for listening. I really hope you enjoyed it. Just a reminder that you can find me over on the website www.themindfuldietitian.com.au, and please join actually quite a large group of wonderful and enthusiastic dietitians on the closed Facebook group, The Mindful Dietitian. The music you hear is called Happiness from Ben Sound, used under the Creative Commons license. Have a great day, everyone.